Good morning, Maria. Excellent. Good. I'm gonna start speaking, just a short intro on my side, and then I'll switch to our main speaker for today. Who's very excited to be with you, and we're gonna do the session. After which, at the end, we're gonna take some questions. Please feel free to write the questions already in the chat as Andrea is presenting if you have something, and we'll make sure to answer them by the end of the session. And I'm sure if there's not enough time to do that, she is available and can gladly help you with anything, any challenge or any curiosity you have, as well as me. And that being said, my name is Julia. I'm running Product Management Festival. Product Management Festival is a conference mainly. We're doing every year since 2013 an event in Switzerland, Zurich, which is coming up and finally taking place in person as well, which we're very happy about getting the tribe together again. And apart from that, we also have other events. We have Connects, PMF Connects, we call them like this. The main reason is we really wanted people to stay connected during these times. We haven't really been able to see each other in person. So these sessions happen online on a regular basis. We announce them on our website, on our newsletters, and we try to have the topics as close to your needs as possible. So if you ever have any requests of a certain topic or a certain company you want to see this during these events, just let us know. And otherwise, there are also other meetings which are starting to be reborn again. So we have local, we call them PM nights. And they are throughout Europe and the world. And we're starting to see that we're being able to do them again in person. And just a short note on other things we're doing. So basically, we also have a trends and benchmarks report, it's called, where we gather data from product managers all over the world. The survey is open right now, so please, if you have the chance to fill it out, we would really appreciate. So based on the answers, we prepare a report every year, which we publish, and you have a lot of useful data for yourself, like salary information based on the area you're in. And we also have some meetups for executives. So if you're a product leader, we do some specific gatherings for product leaders. Right now they're online, but we also do them in the regular times throughout the cities we have represented. And if there's not one in your city, we can start one. And as I've mentioned in the beginning, our upcoming conference is happening on 10th, 11th of November. It will be in person in Zurich. If you're interested in attending this event, for people who are joining the session, there's a discount code. We usually don't give out discount codes apart from team discounts, so it's something which you can really benefit from. If anybody is interested to know more after I'm here, you can contact me, you can contact us. And with that being said, I'm gonna switch to our speaker today, who's super excited to be here. I've seen a lot of positive feedback on the topic, so I'm happy to see that there's a lot of interest still on roadmaps and successfully building them in such a way that your stakeholders are on board. And with that being said, I would like to introduce Andrea Saez. She's a senior product marketing manager at airfocus, who's also sponsoring our session today. And if you want to know more about their platform, I'm sure that Andrea or airfocus directly can support you in finding out how you can benefit from their features. And Andrea, thank you so much for being with us today. Welcome.
Thank you. Should I share my screen now?
Yes, please. That would be great. I'll stop sharing.
Let's get this on then. I'm going to ask the typical very boring question. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Excellent. Awesome. So we're gonna do a bit of a roadmap crash course. Now is a very, very big topic, and we can talk about this for the next 6 hours, but I'm gonna try to consolidate this into a bit of a short talk, and then we can do a little bit of a Q&A at the end, and I can answer some of your questions. So a little bit about me before we get started. I'm a senior product marketing manager at airfocus. I do have a background in product. As you get to know me, and hopefully I'll get to know a lot of you in the future, I like to talk a lot. So product marketing just kind of worked out for me. So I do write a lot about products, especially on Medium. And I love helping organizations to be a little bit more outcome focused. So let's talk about roadmaps. Basics here. A roadmap is a communication document. It is always dynamic, and it focuses on setting direction and intent or intention. And it's very, very important to remember. What is not a roadmap? It is not a list of features. It is not a list of solutions, and it is not a timeline or a Gantt chart. And that might be, for those of you that are familiar with timelines and Gantt charts, a bit of a shocking statement, although hopefully not. So let's start with that statement and understand a little bit about the history of roadmaps. So roadmaps did actually used to look like this, which is a timeline, the Gantt chart that we're all very familiar with. And the reason for that is because if software was even a thing, you had to actually plan and coordinate dependencies between teams, between people. And because the end result was a physical product, you needed to have a phase for preparation and specs and planning and design and development. So it made sense to use this kind of format. But as Agile now became a thing and we've transformed to a different way of working, we now are starting to think of roadmaps to look a little bit more like this. So you might be familiar with the now, next, later structure. And what this really aims to communicate, first and foremost, are what are your committed resources to right now, what you're planning on looking at next, and what comes potentially later. So when you're looking at the now, that's when you have specific scope and stories and more granular focus. The next would indicate either things that you started discovery on or will be moving into discovery next. And of course, the later are things that you're still asking questions about. Oh, did that change? I don't think this changed. This broke. Hold on. There we go. So when it comes to the level of granularity that your roadmap should have, when we're talking about granularity and context, it should really be on the now. The now, like I said, are for things that you already have committed resources to. And really the purpose of a roadmap is to take a step back from all that day-to-day stuff and from your product backlog and really ask those questions about the opportunities that you have in front of you. So if you're doing a lot of work around optimization, for example, then you have an initiative called optimization, or you're asking the question around how you might optimize things better for your customers. And you start outlining things like what you're doing, why are you doing this, what are the benefits for your customers, what you hope to achieve. And when you're thinking about that level of granularity, then you start outlining those things and those specs and those stories as you do that discovery and understand the problem that you're solving with a lot more detail. I really like to form things in a question before I commit to anything. So when things are on the later column, I ask the question, how might we do this? How might we solve this problem? How might we expand our marketplace? Which is really a problem statement. It's just a question. As things move into the next column, then we start addressing a potential hypothesis, which is, can we do this in order to whatever my hypothesis might be? And that allows me to then run discovery. And one really important thing, which I like to say a lot, is Don't approach this from the point of view of proving your hypothesis, but disproving it as much as possible. And that's going to help you to remove a little bit of the bias. And once you've understood the problem, once you've run discovery, then you can have a really solid statement and say, we are doing this in order to achieve this outcome. I'm a very big proponent of not having features on the roadmap where possible. But if you're actually going to outline a feature and just say, we are building a Slack integration, you would really only do that on the now you understand the scope and you understand the focus of what it is that you're doing. Now, if you're thinking about using OKRs, here's a bit of a mind map that you can use to understand where roadmaps come into this. So you have a product vision you want to achieve. From there, you have objectives that will help your focus. And then you have a bunch of outcomes and opportunities that link into that. So your roadmap represents the steps that you're going to take to fulfill that product vision, not in a linear manner, but more of what is your strategy to potentially get to that place. Of course, when it comes to prioritizing the roadmap, you're starting from the top. So you're looking at your vision that breaks down, and then you're going to have initiatives. So a good way of saying, how can I prioritize my roadmap really is to say, do the initiatives that I'm choosing to focus on actually meet my objectives? So if you're trying to focus on something that doesn't meet your objectives, you can almost immediately say it's not the right time to focus on this right now. And you can then focus on other problems to solve. So a really big question that I get a lot is, what do you do if you also want to communicate time? If you know about today is timelines are bad, don't do them. But if you really have to, and you want to communicate that time scope, what you want to do is communicate both your timeline and your roadmap together. So think a column as then breaking down into several releases and several sprints. And I feel like a lot of people have this fear that if you present your roadmap in an analytics later, you absolutely can communicate any form of release, and that's not true. They're completely two separate documents, two separate steps of the process. The roadmap is about your outcomes, and your release plan and your sprints really communicates what your execution is. And a good way of visualizing this, oops, a little bit of noise coming through. Thank you. As I was saying, a bit of a way of visualizing this is to separate that and understand what is your strategy and what is your execution. So for your strategy, you've got key documents, which include your vision and your roadmap, whereas for your execution, you've got your timeline or your release plan. When you're looking at your roadmap, you're asking questions like, what are we working on? Why are we working on these things? What are our objectives? And how do we create value for our customers? Whereas on the execution level, we're looking at things like, how do we get the work out? What is our capacity? How potentially fast can we work? What is our velocity? How agile can we be? Agile is an agility, not agile as in the framework. And how do we unblock those obstacles so that our team can move forward? The strategy side, when we're looking at how work is going to be done, we're looking at running our discovery, understanding our problem, prioritizing our ideas, that continuous discovery and feedback loop. Whereas on the execution side, we're looking at sprints and releases and calculating budget costs and setting up those timelines. So they're two documents that complement each other really, really well. They don't have to work against each other, and you're absolutely free to present both together. Now, a few months ago, I asked the question, are product managers still using a timeline as a roadmap? Because, you know, if there's been this great transformation into Agile and moving away from timelines, why are timelines still so prominent? So I did a survey, around a survey, and about 300, a little bit over 300 people answered. And what was really interesting is that 92% of product leaders and product managers said they do not use a timeline as a roadmap, and only 8% said yes. So it doesn't really feel, based on this study, that there is a misunderstanding about what a timeline roadmap is and what a product roadmap is. So why are they so prominent? It turns out, while product managers may not be using timelines as roadmaps, they are still using timelines. And they're using timelines to communicate with a very unique subset of stakeholders which of course primarily are made up of C-level executives, VCs, and board members, which I'm sure comes to no surprise to any of you. And what's happening is they walk into a meeting, they present their timeline, and then they walk out, which is a really way of having a conversation that's very specific to what you think they might want to know. And a lot of PMs even admitted that the only reason they did that is because they, get that conversation through very quickly. And a lot of the expectations and promises that were given during that meeting with that timeline were even incorrect, which is both a tough situation to be in, which I have complete empathy for, because sometimes it's just really hard to have those conversations with board members that are just asking you, give me that timeline, when is this going to be done? I think we're all very familiar with that. But is there a better way of doing that? And how do we set expectations properly? So before you go into that meeting, ask what kind of information they need, but most importantly, ask why. And that is really what we want to get down to. Often the problem is that the stakeholders don't actually know that there's a different perspective that can be provided when you say the word roadmap. So the word roadmap, as we've seen, comes with a list of implications because of the way roadmaps used to work. But instead, if you ask the why and you end up understanding that what they want to understand is the projected numbers for something, perhaps what you want to do is instead present your OKRs, your potential solutions at play, and your projected numbers if you were to hit those OKRs at 30% or 50% or 70%, whatever the number might be. And then have that retrospective and talk about the outcomes that you wanted to achieve and the outcomes that you did achieve. And of course, most importantly, as I said before, there's no reason why you can't talk about your strategy with the roadmap and then your execution plans with the release plan. Instead of just walking in with a 1-year roadmap or timeline that is going to be unrealistic. And then at the end of the year, you're going to have to try and way you didn't do any of it. So if you change that conversation a little bit to understand why it is that they need some of this information and then presenting that information a little bit differently, it might actually help you change the conversation, change the expectation, and be able to just communicate properly. I wanted to include a bit of a frequently asked questions bit here because there are some very common questions that come up. The first being, if you're in hardware, do you really need to stick to a timeline? Can you really use this modern now next later roadmap? And in many ways, it's really not different. So when you think about it, every product needs a strategy. So hardware might be a bit of a waterfall approach where you have an end date, and software is more of a continuous development and learning and closing your feedback loops and having that continuous discovery. But at the end of the day, you still need a strategy for both. So there's absolutely no reason why you couldn't apply the strategic now next later roadmap into a hardware product. You still need to understand what you're doing, why you're doing it, and who you're doing it for. So it's still a document that's very, very valuable, regardless of whether you have a hardware or software product. The next is, how do you coordinate with customer-facing teams if you're not giving them a deadline? The first is establish a process to communicate the roadmap. Outcome-focused roadmaps do help improve communication with customers. And I've had them before when somebody comes along and says, I really use feature X. First and foremost, make sure that your CS teams and your support teams are asking about problems to solve. So when somebody says, I want this feature, they should be asking, great, can you tell me more about the problem that you're having? Them relay the information back to you. And when somebody asks about, a potential problem that they might be having, it could also be that you're already approaching it and attempting to solve it, but they're just describing a different solution. So this is where that outcome-based roadmap can help ease some of that communication a little bit. And when they see the context of everything else that you're focusing on, it may just be that they realize that maybe that thing that they wanted is not the main thing that they want. So stack ranking in that sense and being able to see everything together is actually really valuable. And the other thing to remember is that there's absolutely no reason for anyone to communicating externally when things go live, the day that they go live. So soft launches are something that I really am a fan of. So soft launch first. Of course, that doesn't mean that you don't need to keep your internal teams up to date as to what is happening and how things work. That's a different conversation. But launching things, have a soft launch first. Test things, understand how things are working out, figure out those bugs first. And just see how people respond, find out that product market fit, and make those improvements, make those changes. And then once you're get to a point where you have all this feedback and you understand how this feature or this product fits within your market, then you can do a hard launch, then scream about it to the entire world. And that's when you work with your marketing and sales teams a bit more in depth. But take advantage of your soft and hard launches because they're going to be really, really positive for you. How do you prioritize your roadmap? Again, I'm going to go through this a little bit more. So again, like I said, start with your objectives, align your product with the company, and make sure that there's that alignment for everybody. You can use things like cost of delay analysis to kind of run negotiation meetings and understand, if you let go of something, what can you do instead, and what is the potential cost of delay for those things. You can also use the opportunity solution tree, which I'm your potential solutions and what the desired outcome might be for that. And only after you've done this, then can you use that framework, whatever your framework of choice might be, to say, we understand what the revenue and the impact and the reach and all these things might be. So start with your objectives, then move into discovery, and then use your framework to frame those conversations with the rest of your team. How do you select a framework? My product management answer is going to be, it depends. There is no easy answer to this one. It really depends on how well do you know your team, how well do you know your industry, which gives you a huge advantage. How well do you know the product? Who are you framing conversations with really matters so that you can provide that information properly. And most importantly, don't be afraid to mix and match. So you don't have to use one framework at a time. You can use different frameworks for different points in the process. And always keep in mind that prioritizing is a really big word, and it depends on what it is that you're prioritizing. It happens, it's not a linear thing. It happens at different points in the process of your development process, whether it's you're prioritizing your objectives, or you're prioritizing your roadmap and your initiatives, or you're prioritizing your ideas. Some people like to prioritize feedback. So it really depends, right? So don't be afraid to mix and match and try different things based on what it is that you're trying to prioritize. Another question that I get a lot is, how do you show dependencies on an outcome-based roadmap if you don't have that timeline and those are the lines that connect together? First of all, understand that a dependency is a lot more than just something that blocks something else. So you have different types of dependencies, like something is blocked by something else, something blocks something else, something is linked to something else, something might be a duplicate of something else. So there's a lot of different types of relationships that happen. I'm a fan of using emoji. You can use tags depending on the tool that you might be using. You might have specific dependency or linking features, but product management tools have evolved to a point where you can definitely do that within whatever product you choose to use. So, like I said, whether those are filters or segmentations that you can use, there's definitely. And the last point that I wanted to include here, which is really important, is the difference between a roadmap and a Kanban. I have seen recently, and I want to say unfortunately, the term Kanban roadmap surface. And that kind of shows a bit of a misunderstanding about both what a Kanban is and what a roadmap is. So roadmap is about outcomes. A roadmap is about understanding what, why, and for whom. Whereas a Kanban is about understanding. So a Kanban is about capacity, and it's about moving things forward. through a very specific progression, whereas a roadmap is a dynamic document and it has to be ready to pivot at any point in time. So two very different things. And with that, we kind of wrap up our crash course, but I think we might have some questions. So if you want to read them out loud to me, I'd appreciate that, or I can try and go through the chat. I don't know what the plan is here.
Thank you very much, Andrea. I've seen there's been a bit of a chat on the chat. So I'm gonna read them either way to hear your questions. I've seen that people have been very kind among themselves to answer each other's questions. Let's start with the last one. What are the main product metrics we need to work on when we implement a product roadmap?
That's an excellent question. There is no straightforward answer to that. So when it comes to product metrics, it really depends on what is important for you to track as a product and as a company. I don't know if by product metrics you mean OKRs or if you mean product metrics in general, and both really depend on your product and your company. So when it comes to your objectives, they should really stem out from your product and your company vision. Yeah, I see OKR versus KPI. So again, those are still going to very much depend on your company. So and OKR stands for objectives and key results, and those will stem from your product vision. There are some very common ones that stem through, I want to say, pretty much all products. So things like how do we increase or increasing user growth, increasing market share, reducing support tickets might be one. So those are objectives that you want to reach as a team. And KPI is a key performance indicator. So a KPI will allow you to understand if you're moving forward with your OKRs. So for example, if you set an OKR to increase your user growth by 10% by the end of the quarter, then the question is, how far along are you of the way? So your KPI might be, monthly active users or weekly active users, so that you can keep on top of making sure that you're going to reach that OKR. Then a product metric is a different thing. A product metric might be things like, are people clicking on something? Are they interacting with a certain part of the product? And not all product metrics are KPIs, and it's really important to understand. So all KPIs are product metrics, KPIs are metrics, but not all metrics are KPIs. And how you set your OKRs and your KPIs and your metrics are really going to depend on, like I said, while there are things that are very standard and common throughout, you have to pick what is right based on your product and on the outcomes that you want to achieve. That was a lot of words. I hope that made sense.
Cool. People are writing a lot of questions, so I don't know. Maybe we start with Vasily's one, who's asking what is different between product development and customer development.
Great question. So customer development is more around developing relationships with customers, whereas product development is more around developing the product itself. So the product development process, when you think about it as a whole, actually starts with your discovery and then goes into the actual development and implementation of the product. But that's not where it actually ends. So once you implement things, you still need to measure less of those things to understand if you did the right thing and if you accomplished the things that you wanted to accomplish in the first place. So it's a really long, if you think about it as a loop, it's called the build, measure, loop cycle. So you build things, you measure the success, you learn from them, and then you start over. So you build again, you measure the success, and you start over. Hope that helps.
I'm sure it does. Alok, you've raised your hand and I've seen you've asked several things. Do you want to unmute yourself and maybe clarify what your Alok questions are?
Thanks.
Hi. Sure.
Hi. Andreas, I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we
Yep.
can hear you fine.
Oh, great. So, my questions was basically the prioritization method that you mentioned, right? The value versus effort one. That basically comes at the very end of it when you have your features in mind and you actually are trying to create your product tree and find out, let's say, at what point of time, what is your lowest hanging fruit, right?
Yeah.
However, there are other methods like Moscow, rice, etc. So, I mean, based on the product life cycle you are in, you have to choose different methods, right? Like, why would you only suggest value versus effort?
I didn't. What I said and what I said on this slide is don't be afraid to mix and match. So I particularly like value versus effort when I don't know or when I don't have enough information. Because how would you know what the reach is or what the impact is or what the whatever else is of whatever framework that you've chosen? Because realistically, you can't really know that without running your discovery. So as you said, you actually need to understand the problem and talk to those inputs before you just randomly decide them. So I think value and effort or impact and effort, whichever you want to choose, is a good way of starting out to create a hypothesis and say, I think this is what I'm going for. But after you run your discovery, then you can use your framework of choice and then say, okay, well, based on rice or ice or lice or Moscow or WSJF or whatever you want, now we understand these things. So as I said, don't be afraid to mix them up and correct them as you get more information, because that's what you should be doing. Is the more information you have, the more accurate these scorings are going to be. Versus saying that what you know today is going to be completely invalid by
Absolutely. So,
tomorrow, which is a good way of
would you
thinking
like,
about it.
I mean, would you say that, do you update the product tree on a daily basis or?
No, so the product tree is more around understanding all of the potential solutions that you have in front of you, and saying there is no one solution that is better than the other. How can we understand which one is going to give us the desired outcome? So if anything, the opportunity solution tree is not around allowing you to understand which one is better or which one is more important, but just mapping all of these things out and then going, cool, can we run experiments on all of this, and then we understand that desired outcome. But on the tree itself, what you want to prevent is somebody saying my idea is more important or more valuable than yours, because what you want to do is experiment first and then saying, okay, now we understand.
Thanks.
Another question comes from Regina, who's asking, how do you map out the product vision in the first place before grouping them to now, next, and later?
That's a great question. So I don't know if you're familiar with, I think it's Roman Pichler's product vision board, but I really, really recommend that you look into it. And essentially, once you have that product vision, you then outline your objectives. And once you have your objectives, then you can say, look at your product backlog and see which items can be grouped together. So you're always going to find items that can be grouped together in one way or another. So you might say, for example, how can we improve our onboarding? That is an initiative right now. So if your objective is to expand your user growth, then onboarding might actually be really important because you want to on. So now that you've defined project or initiative around onboarding, you might have several ideas that go into that. So onboarding is a really big topic. So can you improve your onboarding by whatever your outcome might be? And that already reduces the scope a little bit because you have a very specific outcome in mind. And then from those potential ideas, you can create an opportunity solution tree and then go, what potential solutions do we have to meet our desired outcome for user growth through onboarding? And then run experiments on those things. And then the experiments that give you the most value are then the ones that are going to go into development. So I hope that answered that. That was like a really super quick crash course on product vision. But I really recommend that you look into Roman Pichler's board because it's really, really helpful.
Aurelian is asking.
Oh, there we go. Thank you, Elsa, for posting that.
Aurelian is asking, how do you set goals,
Sorry, go ahead.
including OKRs, without them being time limited? The time is actually an important part of the SMART goals.
That's really good. So just because your objectives and your initiatives don't necessarily have deadlines doesn't mean that your key results cannot. And that's, I'm sure that's a wild statement. So think about it this way. You have an objective to grow your user base. Your time limit can be, how can we grow our user base by 25% by the end of the quarter? So then you have initiatives that feed into that. Now, remember that the roadmap is a strategic document. So your roadmap might say, let's have an initiative around onboarding. I'm going to use the same example. Just because you have an initiative around onboarding, that doesn't mean that your initiative has to have an end date. Because remember that your initiative is going to break down into several releases. And within those releases in the next 6 weeks, you might actually end up being able to put out 2 MVPs for something that might be, a low-hanging fruit, a quick experiment for something that might actually help move that needle by 2% or 3%. You don't know. That's why we run these experiments and run these tests and set those OKRs. So your key result by the end of the quarter, but your objective might be ongoing for the rest of the year. And then you use those KPIs to start measuring the slow progression towards that. And just a side note, something that I remembered is remember that your key results, if anything, does not have to be met by 100%. If you're able to meet it, and you've already done a great job. So OKRs are meant to be bold and they're meant to push you. So try to separate this idea of, because I have this key result that I need to meet by the end of the quarter, I absolutely have to do all of these things. That's not what you want to do. Change the conversation instead to, if I'm aiming to hit this 10% or 25% goal, what things can I do slowly to get that desired outcome? Speed is important in that you don't want to miss out on an opportunity, but speed is not important in the sense of I have to get something out just to meet that objective. Those are two very different conversations. And that's where cost of delay comes into play. So if you choose to focus on something before something else, what are you negotiating and what are you trading off?
Great. Ganesh is asking OKRs versus OGSM, pros and cons from your opinion.
Oh, I don't know that there's a way to really answer that. Again, I'm going to go with, they don't necessarily have to go against each other. So OGSM is objective, your goal, your strategy, and your measurements. And that is exactly what you're doing with an OKR anyway. You have your objective, and then that objective is going to break down into key results. Those key results, you'll have initiatives that feed into that. And at the end of the day, you still have to measure your success. So I don't think they go against each other. I know a lot of people that hate OKRs to begin with. I've hated OKRs in the past as well. I was not a fan. And one thing that I learned very quickly is that I wasn't a fan because I wasn't implementing them properly. And you have to go through several iterations to understand how you're setting those objectives, how you're communicating those objectives, how you're communicating and setting those key results as well. So it's a bit of a learning curve and a bit of a learning process. One tip that I can give you though, is that make sure that you're not setting more than 2 to 3 objectives at a time. And I've made that mistake myself in the past, where my team would have, 5 to 7 objectives that we were trying to do. And I mean, our focus was just all over the place. So top tip, try to have 2 to 3 max. I think that's really the takeaway.
Cool. How to prioritize what to do in the MVP?
So think of whatever your project or your solution is. If you're drawing a unicorn, what is the most lovable way of still showing that unicorn without all the glitter? So MVP should not stand for minimum product. It should exactly minimum lovable product. Thank you, Alok. So how can you still provide value to the user without all the bits and bobs and shiny things? And it's very, very likely that whatever unicorn you've drawn, there's still a minimum version of that is still usable and lovable, as Alok is saying, and functional. And then learn from the process and get feedback on that, and then take that unicorn that you had, match it up with the feedback and go, great, if this unicorn is what we wanted to have and we have this feedback, how much of that still aligns and what have we learned so that we can actually make that unicorn that we had even better. So there's really no straight answer other than, again, build, measure, learn, start over, build, measure, learn. But it's okay for you to want to get to that unicorn as long as you're still learning from the process. And that's really the most important part in product, is that you learn both from your successes, but also from your mistakes.
Great. While implementing the roadmap, what are the top challenges you, Andrea, have faced in your own experience?
Oh, great question. Well, like I said, I just said this, having too many objectives at the same time, definitely a big mistake. Forming things as features. And I have made this mistake by saying, we'll build a Slack integration, we'll build this feature, we'll build that feature. Horrible mistake, never do that. That's why I've learned to change things and ask things as a question instead. And asking questions removes a lot of the bias as well. So it could be that, we're saying we're going to build a Zendesk integration because we heard it from someone, but what people didn't want was a Zendesk integration. Maybe what they wanted was just an API to decide their own help desk integration, right? So asking those questions is really, really important. And I think another mistake and something to keep in mind is that road mapping is not something that you do every day. I think there's this expectation that your roadmap needs to be up to date, like, every single day, and that's absolutely not the case. If you're updating your roadmap every day, you have a problem. You have a vision problem, you have an objective problem, you have a focus problem. Your roadmap should be looked at, let's say, once every couple of weeks, once a month, and make sure that all those things that are going through development are actually being tackled, and that you are running discovery on things. Those are the things that you should be working on. Is, do I understand my problems? Do I understand the market demands? Can I speak to my customers? Focus on those things, because speaking to customers is really what's going to allow you to solve problems and drive that roadmap at the end of the day. But if you're updating your roadmap every day, it definitely shows that there's a problem. Again, your roadmap is not a release plan. That's why you should be updating it every day.
But how do you continuously work with and involve the product roadmap? Question from Julie.
Sorry, could you say that again?
How do you continuously work with and evolve the product roadmap?
That's a great question. So your product roadmap, as I said in the beginning, is not a task list. What it is a dynamic document. So if you're looking at your roadmap, again, let's take a step back. If your team works really going through those releases at absolute speed, which can be a great thing if you've got your specs done really well, and you're able to complete those projects, make sure that as much as you're taking time to deliver things, you're taking time to understand things. So give yourself a time for reflection. And before you choose your next problem to tackle, give yourself a couple of weeks or a week or two to say and understand, am I reaching my outcomes? Can I reflect on the things that I've learned? And then when you're going to select your next problem to tackle, reflect on those moments that you just had and go, great, if I learned these things from my successes and my failures from the previous project, how can I apply this to the next project? And as I said, the roadmap itself is going to vary a lot based on market demands and objectives, and there's all these internal and external factors. So don't see the roadmap as just I grab the next thing and I move it, but look at it more holistically and say, what problems can I tackle next? Do I understand the problems that my customers have? And that is how the roadmap remains dynamic. It's not just about grabbing the next thing. It's really about understanding your product and your market and your industry, and being able to make those tough decisions and say, even though we thought this would be the next thing for us to tackle, it turns out it's not at all. And things now we now need to focus on this one initiative that was in our later column. And so we grab that next, we run discovery on it, we understand the problem, and we move it forward.
Great. Alok has another question. Would you recommend that GTM strategy are based on the roadmap, as they basically answer who, what, why questions?
Why? Yeah, absolutely. Your go-to-market strategy absolutely has to be based on the roadmap. So, as product marketing myself, part of what I do is go-to-market strategies. So they can be aligned. Have that product roadmap aligned with your go-to-market strategy. Absolutely. Don't work against it. That's the worst thing that you can do. Work with it.
Elsa would like to know what roadmap templates or tools would you recommend to draft the best possible roadmap?
Well, have you met airfocus? I'm going to pitch you airfocus. But if I want to answer this objectively, the first thing that you need to consider before choosing a tool is all tools, and I built a couple of now. All tools are going to approach product from a very different point of view. So some tools are super opinionated. Tools like airfocus are a little bit more open to allowing you to create those templates and those needs and those frameworks to your specific needs. But before choosing a tool, understand what it is that you need and what it is that your team needs. So understand your process, outline your process. Understand that a roadmap never stands alone. So a roadmap needs input from your market, it needs feedback, it needs your product backlog. So you can't just have a roadmap that sits in a PowerPoint, and you can't just have a roadmap that sits without all that input outside of it. So choose a tool that allows you to have both your roadmap and your backlog and your feedback that fits into it, so you get the whole picture out of it. And as I said, your needs are going to change with your product growth, with your product maturity, with your company maturity and growth as well. So the best thing you can do, I think, is understand your needs first, understand your process first, and then select a tool. And if you want a tool that's going to adjust to that growth, then certainly check out airfocus, because literally what our mission is to grow and adapt to your needs. So we don't force you to do product in a very, very specific way, but rather allow you to customize it. So it's modular, which means that you get to add the bits that you need as you go.
Cool. Ganesh and Aurelian are both curious if you have any advice on how to move from being a sales lead to a product lead.
I saw that, sales and product led. Yeah, I mean, as Aurelian is saying, it is not an easy move. I can give you a lot of tips around strategies and things to do and whatnot, but before you get there, the number one thing that you really, really need is alignment from your leadership. Because if your leadership is not open to that transformation, no matter what you do, that transformation is not going to happen. So it's like trying to move from, timeline conversations to outcome-based conversations. It's going to be really, 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 really tough if your leadership is not on board. So start by really getting those C-level executives and your leadership team to want to invest the time to make that move. And once them aligned and they're like, yes, we are committed to absolutely doing this, no matter how hard it is, whether it is, over the next few months or over the next few years, once you get them in line, then that transformation is going to be a lot easier, because whatever tips and tricks I give you are going to get you nowhere if you have resistance from your internal teams.
Great. Good solution. Thank you, Andrea. There's a question from Daniela. Daniela, would you like to unmute yourself to ask the question? Maybe it's easier to explain. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the question is about how to better arrange items within the roadmap, and whether, for example, you're running a discovery, you want to run a discovery on something that is already established. Would you recommend to paint it as a separate stream because it might have risks and not be able to achieve what you aim for, or still keep it as a part of your ongoing stream, namely separate discovery to ongoing feature streams or not?
That's a great question. I've never separated things before, but that doesn't mean that that is not something that you could do. I think before you think about separating things or not, the real question you want to ask is, what problem are you trying to solve by running discovery on a specific feature? So if you're looking to change something, then what are you trying to change? Why are you trying to change it? Start with that first. And then that's going to really allow you to form that hypothesis and go, if we do this, then we expect outcome X. But I think the separating or not separating, I think that perhaps is something that you might want to experiment on with your own team and see how that goes. But the most important thing is really to understand, what do you get out of, or what your customers get out of, what is the benefit and the problem that you're trying to solve by running discovery on that feature to begin with.
Okay, thanks a lot. The reason why is that I witnessed different approaches and I wasn't quite sure whether you might want to do that or not.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where it really depends, right? And I hate giving that answer because product management is full of it depends, and it really is going to depend on your team and on how you work, and there is no right or wrong, I think. And I love Teresa Torres, who's always saying there's no wrong or right way to run discovery, because there really isn't. The important thing is that you're doing it and that you're asking those questions.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Great. We're done. I'm so happy to see that the audience was super engaged and had so many questions. I haven't seen in a very long time such a interactive session. Thank you so much, Andrea, for taking the time to be with us today. Thank you as well, airfocus. If you have more questions on how airfocus can help you, support you with your roadmap, feel free to reach out to them, or feel free to reach out to Andrea with whatever question you have. Is it okay for people to contact you? Yes, that's what my question was. So
yes, I just put I put my Twitter on there. I'm quite active there. If not, you can also reach me on LinkedIn. Just Andrea Saez. I don't think there's a lot of me's, but there might be. Just look for the one that says I ask a lot of questions, because that is quite literally my job.
I wish you all a super nice day. Hope to see you in the next session. And thank you again for being with us today. We will be sharing the recording. Can we share also the slides, Andrea?
Yes, absolutely. I will put them up on speaker deck and I'll send them your way.
Okay, good, because so many people thought it was so useful, they wanted access to it. So great, we can do that. Thank you so much for your flexibility.
Excellent, no worries. I'll upload them to speaker deck shortly, and I'll show them out.
Excellent. Have a good day, everyone. Until next time.
Cool, thanks everyone for joining. Bye.